What I definitely have learned at this point is that there's tremendous potential for forest gardening here in North Carolina. People have been forest gardening for thousands of years in tropical areas, and towards the end of the last century, a man named Robert Hart in England started first, as far as we know, the first temperate forest garden in the world. And so there's some forest gardeners in England, but there's not too many temperate forest gardeners here in the United States. So this is one of the first ones. In gardening my whole life, when I first started gardening, it was a lot different than what I do now. I used Miracle-Gro and all this, and definitely wasn't organic farming by any means. I didn't know much about building soil or taking care of the soil. I didn't know much about ecology, just kind of what I had observed here and there. And I liked to do landscaping when I was a kid. I had a couple of ponds that I built when I was a kid, water garden. In college, I majored in environmental studies, and which we didn't really study agriculture at all in the environmental studies program. But for my senior project, my big senior capstone project, as they called it, I started a community garden in Denison, Colorado, and it was on the school campus, and we got some of the grade school students in town involved and this and that, doing some education, show people where food comes from or where we'd like it to come from, you know. So yeah, that's kind of what I did in college. When I moved up here, when I acquired this piece of property, I walked into a hillside covered with jack pine, which is, for the most part, what it still is today. And the jack pines are rooted in pretty poor soil. This hillside was clear-cut a while back and used for grazing after that. It was pasture. It's a little steep to be pasture as far as I'm concerned. So essentially what's happened is all the topsoil has washed away, which is the situation in most parts of this country. There's no more topsoil. It's gone. It's washed away. And the foundation of every agricultural system and everything in the world, as far as I'm concerned, is the soil. So it is our job as forest gardeners or farmers or human beings to rebuild the topsoil that has been depleted. And one way that we're doing that here is we're cutting down these jack pines, which aren't really good for a whole lot. They're good for building soil. Once they've been cut and laid down on the ground, they rot down pretty quick. And then once you've cut the jack pine, then there's more solar gain on the hillside, which means that the carbon pathways are sped up. Plants are growing faster. There's more biomass being accumulated. So sun is key. We're using the jack pines to build swales, which are used for capturing rainwater on the hillside, because hillsides don't assimilate rainwater very well because it's steep, and so the rain has a tendency to run off of the hillside and, in this case, down into the street and then out into the French Broad River. So we're building swales, which we'll get to in a moment, what swales are. But these are jack pines here, and they comprise the bulk of the forest in this area. Jack pines are kind of sort of invasive species as far as I'm concerned. After a serious disturbance like a clear cutting or a serious fire, they're one of the first species to sort of take over the area and kind of keep the soil in place. They're not that good at building soil, unfortunately, while they're standing. But they're pretty good once they've been cut down. So that's a jack pine, but this is also a jack pine, or was a jack pine, and this is how I like them to be in the forest garden is on the ground. This is a jack pine too, but obviously it's been cut. So the carbon that comprises the wood of the jack pine is going to be topsoil pretty soon. And the topsoil is going to do a lot more for us than the standing jack pine in our forest garden setting. So we're returning the carbon and the minerals back to the soil so that we can turn it into things like apple trees and blueberries, fungi, which are more useful to humans and to everything, I think, than jack pines. We also use the jack pines for holding the berm side of swales in place, and we will get to what swales are in a little bit, and I'll show you a swale that we made here and how we make swales. So the dirt here is not good on this hillside. It's not good right now, it will be soon. This is the dirt here. It's clay, it's dry. It doesn't hold moisture that well, but it's a good starting point for building good topsoil. So how we're building topsoil up here is we're planting fast-growing plants into the clay, which builds organic matter really rapidly, and organic matter is what topsoil is comprised of. So let's look at some of these plants that I planted. They're building topsoil for us. So this is an area here where we have started to build topsoil again. And the way we're doing that is planting fast-growing plants, nutrient accumulating plants. So the jack pines have been cut here, which is allowing the sun to get down to the ground so that we can grow fast-growing cover crops, which are going to build topsoil much faster than the jack pines would have. We have field pea and several different types of clover growing here, which are tapping up minerals from the subsoils, fixing nitrogen, making the soil more friable with the root systems, and above all, building biomass. And this is like the rye that you eat, make bread from, but we're not going to make bread from this, we're making soil from this, or it's making the soil. So the rye plants grow through the winter time. We sow them in the fall. Eventually they'll be sowing themselves in the fall because we'll just let the heads grow up, go to seed, drop their seeds, and then grow year after year. So they're annual, so the whole body of the plant dies and turns into soil every year. So you don't have to mow it or anything like this. You don't have to till it. The root systems of rye are very fine, almost like cobwebs. So they really help to break up all the particulates of soil and make the soil more permeable to water and other roots from crop trees and blueberries and the things that will produce our food later on. From using a lot of legumes here to build nitrogen in the soil. And the way legumes build nitrogen in the soil is they bring in nitrogen in a gaseous form into their bodies from the air, and then with a symbiotic relationship with bacteria in the soil, they fix the nitrogen into little nodules in their root systems in the soil. So this is one such legume. It's known as field pea, and it's a lot like just the regular sugar snap peas or snow peas that we grow in our annual gardens, but we are using them for growing soil and fixing nitrogen into the soil, and you can eat them too, which is pretty good. Another nitrogen-fixing plant, legume, is hairy vetch. It's one of my favorites. I like it a lot. Chickens like it too. We don't have any chickens here yet, but hairy vetch, so again, fixes nitrogen from the atmosphere into the soil. And fast decomposing leaves, they're kind of hairy, as the name implies. It's a vine, so it sort of forms this symbiotic relationship with the rye, in the sense that the rye grows up and acts kind of like a trellis, while the vining legumes, like the vetch, climb the rye to get more sunshine, thusly fixing nitrogen into the soil, which causes the rye to grow faster and bigger, and that means more soil for the forest garden and people. So it's a very good thing. Burdock. As far as most people are concerned, burdock is a weed, and as far as forest gardeners are concerned, It's a soil building plant. It's also a dynamic accumulator. And dynamic accumulators it's a group of plants that tap deep into subsoils, and they pull up minerals from the subsoils and accumulate them in their leaves so that they can make a more mineral dense topsoil over the long run. So we like plants like burdock with deep tap roots. And another bonus of burdock is it has furry leaves, and plants that have furry leaves decompose really quickly. Mullein and rhubarb are other plants with furry leaves that rot really fast, so they build topsoil very quickly. So this is a good one. Okay, so let's go ahead and take a look at what the soil looks like after a year or so of planting cover crops here. So there's a bit of a dusting of black across the top, just from organic matter starting to rot down and turn into topsoil, and the soil is becoming more friable from all the tiny plant roots growing through it. The soil is cooler and moister than the soil that hasn't been planted with a cover crop yet, because the cover crop is helping to shade the soil and allow the water to kind of hang out in there for a little while before the sun has a chance to dry it up. And as a result, the soil microbes and bugs and fungi are having a lot more fun over here than they are over there, where the jack pines have yet to be cut and a cover crop is yet to be planted. So the goal is to get all this soil covered on this hillside with the soil building cover crops, so that our crop trees and berry bushes and nut trees and such are going to do better than they would otherwise. Water is every bit as important as soil in the forest garden, because plants don't grow without water, and so soil doesn't grow without water. We're on a hillside right now, and so water can be a bit tricky in this kind of situation. Water doesn't want to stay on the hillside, it wants to run off the hillside, over the top of the soil, and into the street. So that's why we're building swales. So since we want the water in the hillside and not running off the hillside, we have to change the shape of the hillside so the water permeates into the soil. What I'm standing on right now is called a swale. I'm on the berm side of the swale. A swale is consisted of a ditch, a trench that runs along the contour of the hillside, and then a berm on the downhill side of that trench. So since it runs along the contour, all the water that enters into that ditch stays in that ditch, and eventually it drains down into the soil instead of running up the hillside, and then that water irrigates everything downhill from the swale. So it's a pretty efficient, low-cost irrigation system, and it's especially critical on a hillside this steep. And since we're on such a steep hillside, we've actually taken jack pine logs and we've thrown them in the ditch side of the swale to sort of further stabilize that. And these jack pine logs will rot down pretty quick because there's so much water available in this area. So we've also planted the berm side of the swale with nitrogen fixing plants to sort of further build up the soil here. So this is the forest garden irrigation system here. So we're standing towards the bottom of the forest garden right now on the earth that has been terraced, and that's the stuff that looks really green, and that's because it's catching a lot of water. And so we're essentially marching up the hillside and terracing as we go and laying down soil building cover crops. And eventually we will have this whole hillside terraced and swaled, catching water, building soil, and eventually growing a lot of food. So even though a forest garden is a perennial-based agricultural system, we still grow some annuals up here. So we're in the annual garden right now. And since we're on the hillside, we had to terrace out all the garden beds, which is pretty good because it helped loosen up the soil and get some air into the soil and sort of jumpstart everything. And we got the same sorts of cover crops planted in these beds right now since it is winter time, although it doesn't feel like it today. So winter is the time for building soil here in the annual garden. So growing cover crops, growing soil. We also have some turnips over here. We'll eat some of those. We'll eat some of these for dinner actually. I'm gonna pull some of these right now. This bed, for some reason, has built some particularly good soil this year, and I think it's because we added a lot of biochar early on in the spring. And so all the nutrients have been just kind of sticking in this bed. It's been staying pretty moist all year. We got some turnips planted in. You need some of these for dinner. Some lettuce growing over here. Lettuce seems to hold up into the early part of the winter, so it's a good crop to have right now in the early part of the winter. So we got some celeriac growing in this bed. It's another fall crop, really disease resistant, good plant to grow here, and eat the root. Tastes a lot like celery, really tasty in soups. How we doing? Thank you. So we're making biochar right now, which is same thing as charcoal, and biochar is essentially carbon. That's pretty much all it is. So to get the carbon, we round up a bunch of biomass. We're getting jack pine chunks, and so we got some floorboards here, some pine floorboards, bamboo. And we load them up in the biochar maker, which is just a 55-gallon drum. It's a burn barrel pretty much. And you burn all the biomass up till the point when the carbon is just about to start burning. Prior to that, you're just burning volatile gases that cook out of the organic matter during the fire. And then, so right when the carbon's about to start burning, you throw the top on the burn barrel and you mound up soil around the air holes at the bottom of the burn barrel, and then it suffocates the fire. And then you open it up after it cools off in a few hours, and you have biochar. And so biochar is a good thing because it houses soil microbes, houses fungi and bacteria, all the good soil building critters that we're friends with. And it's also really good because it sequesters carbon from the atmosphere in the form of biomass, and then it gets locked into the soil in the form of carbon, charcoal. And charcoal has a half-life of 1,000 years, so it stays in the dirt for a long time, a lot longer than us. So it's a good thing. So that's why we're making one. Where you build the fire is under here. Stuff. Under it, okay? And then a lid goes on that. It's got a gasket, so it's sealed up. You built the fire under here, you got your biomass in there, and it's cooking the wood, essentially, okay? But we're cooking gas out of wood right now, which sounds pretty fancy, but that's what happens when you build a fire. So cooking off the gas, and then what's going to be left is carbon, charcoal. And so as soon as that the gas starts cooking off and the charcoal starts to burn, we're going to suffocate the fire. We're going to throw the lid on. We're going to mound soil up around these holes down here where the air is coming in, and then it'll put the fire out, and we'll be left with biochar.
Well, my name's Mark, and I is the one that done this video up at Tony's mountainside here. And overall, what I've learned is that he's taking a overgrown pine forest that has been lost of its topsoil due to erosion from overgrazing. He's taking these jack pines and cutting them down, putting them in swales, and building biochar, which he builds into the raised beds. All this is a way to recycle the jack pines to make new topsoil, which is much faster than what would be done by Mother Nature itself. The swales themselves provide a area for putting wood into, and thus decomposition to build up the soil and to hold water. These are basically horizontal and will hold water evenly. They're filled in with logs, and then the berms are built up from the outside fill of the swales, and dug into this is biochar and organic material that he then seeds with all the green nitrogen fixing plants that you saw. Overall, I was very impressed with the hand-hewn work that Tony's done on the side of this mountain. He's put a year's work into this so far, working a full-time job as well. So this has just been done with after work and weekend time. So within 5 years, Tony should be picking the first fruits of his labor, and in 10 years have a full-fledged fruit garden. And as he said at the beginning,
and so there's a lot of room to learn.
Genius at work here. All right. Ladies and gentlemen, what we're going to talk about today is called soil. Okay? And the science of soil. Thank you. Okay? Now, right here, you can see the word soil is spelled S-O-I-L. Okay? It comes from the Latin root of sow, which means to sow, and oil, which is a lubricant. Thank you. Now, we're going to talk about the biology and chemistry of soil and the soil composition within and thereabouts and henceforth. Thank you. Yes, question. Okay, save it for later. Okay, now, composition of compost. Those are kind of the same words, so we'll just skip that portion. Thank you. Now, essentially what we have here is a bunch of words and things, and they all come from the same source. Some people call it the universe, other people call it God, or you could just say it's us. If you could wrap your mind around the genius that is standing before you right now, you would be weeping like little girls. Yes, question. Okay, everyone leave. Leave. Thank you.